All right, welcome to the CloutTrends second video interview. We have Kanshi, the founder of Love4Src, one of the nodes I really enjoy using on BitClout. And since this is, CloutTrends for BitClout, we all know what it is. And let's just dive in. So, Kanshi, why did you start Love4Src, and how do you, view the evolution thus far? And then we'll get into, what's coming later.
Sure. Thank you very much, Darren, for having me. Thank you very much for the invite and the opportunity to present Love4Src to the wider audience. Why did I start it? Basically, from the very beginning, I was thinking about the node, focused on the software makers, not just software developers, but software makers at the whole. And basically, I want to provide people with an environment in which we can perhaps test some features a little bit sooner before they get to the main node, and build a developers community that is basically decentralizing the development of BitClout, which I think also is important because there's just many visions, right? I see now when I'm setting up nodes for different community leaders and different communities, I see how different their needs are. Right, and not like in most cases they don't match with what the mainstream BitClout, well, mainstream maybe that's not the right word, but the core community that is working on the BitClout repositories that they would be looking for, and in that sense it's good to have like a base that we can use and quickly replicate to have like a professional production ready setup of a BitClout node, right?
Yeah, so let's talk about the initial presentation or marketing of Love4Src, or even just what you had on the profile. So I think when I first discovered Love4Src, I said, this looks really cool. It looks like it's mainly for supporting developers. And you described it somewhere between a stable release and like the latest. So, it's sort of the latest stable, if you will. And that's what got me interested, is I could test new features. But I think it's kind of grown beyond just useful for developers. Maybe talk a little bit about that, like who you intend to use the node, and how that's grown.
Yeah, definitely. Here, what you pointed out very nicely is the fact that basically I'm working with the core repositories too, right? In the sense that I'm looking what are the changes arriving there, whether or not they can be merged to Love4Src, or this kind of like a distribution that is there, because it's also open source, right? So others can also use it if they're looking for something that was, let's say, somebody took a look at it, because the core developers, they have their own infrastructure that they have to cater to and their own release process, right? So, and they're also testing some things. They don't want to push things too early, which is totally understandable. But that doesn't mean that the community doesn't or cannot benefit from it. And a good example here is the NFT showcase, right? So we're all waiting and supporting the main NFT showcase drop on BitClout.com. But as we saw during the past few days, there are NFT showcases that are happening on community nodes. And this is also one of those key differences or key benefits that the community node operators can get by having their own infrastructure, right, and their own audience that is built around their community, right? They can start using the features of BitClout to cater for their own community, essentially decentralizing our social network, right? Because many people are also complaining, and I'm also trying to point that out, is that the main core node, that's about BitClout, and obviously that's the point. That's how it should be, right? And if you want to decentralize it, we also need to start at some point, rather sooner than later. We need to start building those community nodes, and I'm very happy to see those community nodes starting. But I'm also, as a like a software architect, I'm also aware of the amount of work that needs to happen to be able to replicate that code and decentralize development, because every single community will have its own features. The Love4Src might look like the reference front-end repository, but it's not that's not the case with every single other community front-end or node that we have deployed, right? And here also it's important to notice the difference between the front end and the node, right? So the front end, we've seen also some scripts to which are very cool, but they automate only deploying of the front end, while the administration, the NFT showcase, for example, or the global feed, all of that is, central and controlled by the node. So you need to have this full stack to be able to actually use all of those features. Besides the consequences in the future. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I think there's a lot to unpack there, and one of those being is that a core feature of decentralization is the need to have these other nodes that operate and provide different communities, different tools or curation tailored to that community's need. Do you see Love4Source as having a theme, if you will, or a topic that really defines it as a sub community, and sort of a secondary or follow up to that? If not, what's sort of the differentiation as you try and reach the generalized user?
We want to cater for software makers, which means primarily software developers. But for me, person that makes software is also a tester, is also a product manager. There's also even an HR person that hires for IT projects. They're extremely important for the whole process. And so for me, having all of those people, this whole community involved in the activity of building the software world, this is the community that I want to cater to. And of course, not all of those needs can be satisfied, but being a social network that is focused on this specific activity of building up the software world or creating software products, perhaps primarily right now focused on BitClout, because most of the people are talking about BitClouts, but the stuff that lands on the for example, the global feed is more like related to the general development activity and building up the software world. So this is the community that we want to focus. And the reason for this is that once we do manage to create a vibrant developers community, that means that we will be able to use that community to create other nodes, right? So we have to. It's for me, it's some sort of a foundation, right, of people who are trying to to replicate this kind of business model that BitClout.com is demonstrating for us, right? So here's the node. You can onboard people. You can sell BitClout through Bitcoin exchange to them. You can do promoted posts. You can do community NFT drops. So this is the stuff that you need to replicate the full model of the core team, essentially, to be able to engage in that. And I want to point out here a thing that people oftentimes miss, which is that you do need developers supporting you while having that node and building that community, right? So it's not, many people think that, oh, I'm just going to set up a node, I'm going to be good to go. That's not the case. Running a node and catering for that community's needs, right, is much more than just paying somebody to install it, right? You want to adapt, you want to focus, people will come to you with requests, right? You need to be able to handle it somehow. You need to have processes in place for this, right? And so we're also trying to educate people in that regard, demonstrate good practices that can be followed here, right? And it seems to be working so far, perhaps not with the maximum velocity that I would like, but I mean, very happy to see space for improvement and ready to skyrocket anytime.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about something you mentioned, which was team that supports a node. You need a team of developers. Let's talk about at Love4Source how you're thinking about building the team to support Love4Source, and then sort of a side train of that is that you mentioned being able to have these other community nodes that are maybe based on some of the learnings from Love4Source. Do you view that as something that would be a fork of the Love4Source project? And you obviously need to take a team, fork off a part of the team for that too. Is that what you were thinking? And maybe talk through the team a bit on the core node as well.
I'll start from the latter because I think it's much simpler and shorter topic. So everybody, again, Love4Src is an open source project, right? So you can use not only the source, you can also use the Docker builds that or the containers that we have, or our builds, right? So in that sense, the front end that is using the backend, that backend can be coming from us, that backend can be coming from BitClout repository, right? The difference is that our backend might be a little bit further along than the stable tag that is published there. I don't want to be nitpicky, but maybe even admitted at some point that sometimes she forgets to update that tag, which kind of like is good because the stable is not problematic, but I've noticed sometimes that I prefer to be at the front because some features start to be available, right? As we noticed with NFTs, for example, but there are a few of those before, right? So you can start as a fork of the Love4Src frontend that has some more tweaks, or you can start as a fork of BitClout.com frontend, which is pretty much almost the same, right? But without those few tweaks, hopefully. And I'm also asking the community, please feel free to backport or publish upstream the changes that we get at Love4Src. Sadly, it's hard for me to coordinate every single direction, but thankfully we have the team, so hopefully and the team is growing fast, I would say, especially during this month. We onboarded several team members. I'll just mention them. Michael Giordano is one. He's a technical project manager, developer, and he's gonna help us with some of the front end development and also managing and coordinating different activity that we have. We want to do some Cloud4Source type of bounty gem coding sessions and that kind of stuff. Perhaps Michael will want to get involved in this. I'm sure that all of the team will want to be involved in this. I know I will for sure. Then we have also Zach Mead. Zach is a blockchain developer, and he's also looking at different things. But mainly, Zach, I think, is looking forward to help me out with the bot that we want to develop. That will not only moderate the content on Love4Src, but also provide services to other node operators. But so far it's me mainly that is doing development. Again, we just started onboarding the team. There's Pan Pavel, who's a developer, and he's been working with me in my startup studio for the past 3 years, and he's getting up to speed also to start improving the code. Then we have a little bit less technical, but it doesn't mean that less valuable for our project, part of the team, which is Madame Fetish, the famous Joe, who is doing a lot of reaching out to the community and informing people about how awesome Love4Src is and what can it do for you. Even like the simple things that she came up with, like, Kanshi, I need more characters in the post, so. And that was really a simple tweak. And again, perhaps on this example, we can see that perhaps the main core node doesn't want that simple fix, right? It has to be a separate repository, right? Those communities cannot wait for those changes to be introduced to the main repository. It has to happen immediately. In that sense, this demonstrates this need for formalization of decentralized development. But getting back to the team, there's also Slava, who's helping out with a lot of visionary stuff. He introduced me to Arweave, and we're planning to do a lot of good integrations here using his Arweave project, Art by City. Perhaps there's some, additional user value that we can get from this, and plenty of other stuff. Perhaps merchandising coming soon. Hint, hint. Then there is also Matreshka, who's just joining and is going to start producing content about different profiles of people from BitClout on our wiki, because Love4Src also has a wiki that we just started, but we're building up slowly but surely. Perhaps Chet will find some time to help us out with that too. The famous Wikipedia admin from the natural. But I mean, everybody has a few things running up in the air. So so along those lines, this, let's say, activity would. I'm not sure. I hope I'm not forgetting anybody. I mean, there's plenty of people that are supporting us. We hope to onboard and get closer with the David to help us out a little bit with communication, because people tell me that I'm faulty in that regard, but for sure we need more people talking about Love4Src. But the team is growing, and we're getting that team involved with the coins. Basically, I'm trying to kind of map it to the amount of coin purchases that are generated through the activity of that team member. This is something that I was also doing with ArtStation, but that was more with the NFTs. It's a little bit different dynamic, but being as architect of a social network before and looking very deeply at this space, I'm very interested in exploring also these dynamics that happen between the developers, but that's a different topic, I guess.
Well, yeah. So let's talk though a little bit about the way that you're funding the project. And before we jump into the tech stack, because there's obviously the OpEx side, or the human capital expense. Let's talk about, we just briefly touched on that with the team, and how it sounds like you're almost compensating to some degree based on performance, leveraging the creator coin of Love4Src. But let's talk about that a little bit. Does that mean that you're sort of reliant on new investment coming into Love4Src, and you're really funding the project through the founder award, or is there some other mechanism?
No, not really. So the coin, I think it's still in the early stage, and I expect that the value of that coin to keep growing for as long as more people are learning about Love4Src and what we do. We set up nodes for people for money, basically, and we've set up the BitClout Espanol, for example, node. We've set up the natural average node, which is yet to be. I hope I'm not spilling the news, but I mean, I give them enough time, I think, to announce it by themselves. But there's many people are asking me for the nodes. There are some open discussions. For me, it's always I request there to be a developer, right? So there has to be a handout, and if that handout can happen, and I see that that makes sense for me to get involved, there is a simple off the table offer, very attractive. I'm not gonna publish it on your podcast, but if somebody's interested, feel free to hit me up. And it's a very straightforward process, and yeah, I can get you going quite soon. The tech stack, I think, it's a good moment to get into that now, because what does it mean to have a node running, right? The repository run that was published by the core team, that's essentially a developer setup, and people should realize that. So that's the first thing that I would put on the table. The second thing that I would put on the table is that I would strongly advise people not to run this on AWS servers or any cloud thingy. This is not a cloud application. Why would you want to run it in cloud? Cloud applications have a completely different architecture, and they work completely differently, right? So you want to have it on ideally a dedicated server that has an unmetered connection, right? So you can do as many re-downloads of the core as you want, because for some reason the transaction stopped, and you don't have to be concerned that much about the cost, and having one server is more than enough. I mean, of course, it has to have some decent parameters, but it's fully capable. And then the question is how to run
Kanshi,
it.
can I pause there for a moment? We'll talk a little bit about it, because I think there's quite a bit to talk about there. One being, because I think a lot of folks will want to run nodes on the cloud, and maybe as you mentioned, there's not really, you're not really taking advantage of things like serverless and functions that you might use, like Lambda functions you might use
Yeah,
on
exactly.
AWS. So
Yeah.
there's not really a reason to from that standpoint. But why wouldn't you be able to just set up like a single virtual machine and run
Oh,
it
you
run
can,
it
of
there?
course. Of course you can. It's just going to be more expensive, right? And also you need to remember that in cloud there are a little bit more virtualization layers, right? And those virtualization layers, they're perhaps not as much of an issue in web apps and that kind of stuff. But when you starting to run a backend that is obviously doing some in memory, management and on its own, right? I'm not sure. I didn't look that deep into that code, but I would expect that as much as this is gonna run, it's not gonna be as performant as if you would just run it bare metal. I mean, and I'm not saying even run it bare metal, run it in a Docker. That's fine. Like have your own private cloud setup, and this is basically what I do. So I set people up with a HashiCorp stack, which means that they're getting a Nomad orchestrator, they're getting a console service mesh, and it's all like a clean vanilla configuration that is downloading the Docker images that I prepared and checked on Love4Src, right? And they get their own repository with the front end that they can modify, and is going to get automatically built and deployed into the Nomad cluster, which is running on that server. And then once that grows, right, you just add new servers to that cluster, right? Register them out, and you can automatically start distributing it further, right? Of course, there's also the proxy, the authentication setup, all of the integration of the stack, and also with the repository management system, so that you get like you as a developer, you can basically sit down with it and start working with it in a continuous deployment manner, right? Or if you want, you can start introducing branches and have your own process and then just merge into main, or you can just pick it up and start modifying it further, right? Perhaps not every single step of this is open source, or because this to a degree is my intellectual property and like the know-how, but I mean, it's a setup for you. You have access to absolutely everything. It's your server. It's on your machine, right? And I'm going to walk you through it. It's ready for you to pick it up and start growing from there, right? And I think this setup is basically several times fast. I don't want to say faster, but for sure cheaper than the cloud setup. And I think it's about 2 times faster. I didn't compare it, 1-to-1, but I think it is a little bit faster. Maybe not 2 times, maybe like
So
1.5.
some people have mentioned that they've noticed a speed increase on Love4Src, and I think that's great. Let's talk a little bit about maybe the scaling component. And you mentioned you can add, additional machines there to the cluster, but maybe talk about just in terms of like, is there a stepwise, kind of a discontinuity when you hit a certain volume, or when can you stop adding to the cluster and you have to do something different?
I would say when you see the users having too much of a latency geographically, right? So what I'm thinking about now, I basically added a redundant server. The server, even with the load that I was getting from CloudFeed or Cloudcast, we didn't really notice the load incoming. I've seen like when bots are hitting us, we don't really notice that. I did manage to notice like a large spike in backend activity when I was doing 200 parallel end-to-end like loading of the blocks for my block, right? But everything was still working fine. It's just you could see that it was under load, So if you can maintain for minutes and hours over 200 parallel at the same time downloading and fetching data, I don't know what that would be, but basically adding another server, like where that ceiling would be, right? I'm not really sure yet. But basically, if you add another server or yet another one behind the load balancer, which is the setup that you get, I mean, there's just like then geographic spreading, I would say. So now I'm thinking perhaps we should set up a cluster in US such that people get faster pings, right? Because now the servers are in Europe, so let's say there is some latency, but they are so well connected that basically, like, we're winning because we have less intermediary layers, the same way that BitClout is winning, right?
What about
It's just with tech.
what about uptime or uptime of full functionality? If we want to think about it that way for things, like reindexing the DB or something, how are you thinking about that as the volume grows? And what sort of redundancies or resiliency measures are you putting into place for app continuity?
I would definitely recommend people concerned about it to have at least 2 servers. I mean, for sure. The easy win, even on one server, is to have multiple front ends running, right? So when you do a deploy, you're not getting the downtime in between, right? So that was an easy fix for me. I just made 3 of those jobs register into the load balancer, right? And there are 3 things, only one updates at a time, so they have time to register into the DNS. And you could do the same thing with the backend, but from what I've noticed, the backends, I think, don't work that well together yet, besides the blockchain level, of course, right? But there is the global state, and that thing is starting to cause issues, or at least it caused me issues, and I think I've seen it also happening on the BitClout.com, in the sense that integrating those backends together so that only one hosts the global state is kind of cumbersome, or at least I'm still yet to succeed doing it. And so basically what I did is I've had to manually switch back and forth the node that I had before that did have the global state in it, so like people who were verified, or the NFT showcase, or whitelists or blacklists, right? And I had to switch it off, clean its database so that it reindexes like calmly without users interfering. And then the second server with the second backend that was already synchronized, it was all the time serving the users and the API. Once both got everything correct, I switched back to the first backend, having restored the global state, having all the transactions and everything continue to sync, and the backup backend, as I think of it now, is serving the API only, right? So I use it also to see to separate the traffic of the API and from the traffic from the website itself, right? I think there's going to be more servers that I'm going to keep adding to this equation, perhaps at different locations. And I'm thinking about the US being the next location to make people basically have faster load times. But yeah, I think the future is very, very interesting, very bright.
Yeah, so let's talk about one final thing, just in terms of it'll sort of be a continuation of this discussion, but step back for broader context as well, which is for example, on the back end, running multiple backends. Do you view that as a problem or a something that could be improved that the core team will do, or do you view that as really something that the community will have to do on their own?
I think that improvement is going to come very soon. Thank you for bringing this up. I wanted to mention, but I guess I rhetorically went sideways. I believe that this Postgres integration is going to solve this thing. And it makes total sense, right? And this is how you would normally do it. Perhaps not use blockchain for this, perhaps use some basically negotiated transaction protocol, which, I mean, Postgres is perfectly capable of delivering. And yeah, so I guess this is the solution. The solution that was implemented a few weeks ago, I guess, is that there is an environment shared global state param that you can use to hook up servers together. But this is the thing that I'm still to get it to work. So I'm looking forward to the Postgres because that thing seems to be the final solution that the core team is doing. this is also, I think, touching on an interesting topic that the challenge that we're facing in terms of like decentralizing this development is that we're not really sure. I mean, we know what the core team is doing, we're watching very closely, and we're just making sure that we're not, over like doing the same thing in parallel, because it just doesn't make sense, right? The core team is way faster than whatever I can do with or the few guys that we're here. But hopefully with time, we can start provide more valuable contributions, and for sure there are plenty of great ideas from the community that we want to test drive very, very soon.
Great. And I think, you mentioned the Postgres integration there, that being a, structured or relational database. And let's talk about what interesting projects might be using something like MongoDB or non-relational database or NoSQL database for things like, language processing to do search, or, other interesting things that a node operator could do on their own that's maybe not part of core. One that comes to mind is member cache. I don't know if you've had experience with that node. Are you planning anything for Love4Source, and maybe what else have you seen in that realm?
Yes, plenty. Many of nodes are doing plenty of great things. Member cache being one of them. I also like to use, when I'm showing to like regular users nodes, I also like to use audio node as an example of, like this concept that listen, and this is decentralized such that these people can, create this type of audio offer. There is, I think we're still a very young community, and there is what I'm experiencing now is that we're starting to build trust between those node operators, right? So the devs are starting to know each other, or the community devs are starting to know each other, and it comes with time because we basically need to produce code. Like we need to see each other's work. We need to see what each other can do and what is their plan for the future, right? And in that sense, I think there was some overlap in the beginning when people completely didn't know each other. But now I think there are, like people are starting to excel at specific features, let's say, right? Some of them get integrated into the mainline, some are not, right? So here also I'm very happy to have Love4Src, where we can, freely experiment with all of them, right? We don't have all of that spotlight that the core node has, right? So it's easier to experiment for us. We can set up a subdomain, like, and have a site front end to play with. On the other hand, some features I think can be improved upon, and I started working on the reputation related systems also from the moment that I arrived to BitClout. I was the participant of the first BitClout productathon, where I basically decided to cut a week out of my life and go win the prize. Sadly, I didn't win it. Cloudcast stole the spotlight, rightfully so, of course. But I've had a bunch of code to analyze the user activity, but I figured that I'm gonna evolve it a little bit, and then the node came by, and so it just makes sense for us to now, once the situation around the node stabilizes, in a sense we have the team, it starts working by itself, to start to move, or at least I'm moving my focus to the to development of the bot, right, or the bot services. Right now, the bot can detect the language of the post, which was kind of requested by node operators, or like the future and existing node operators of the international communities, right? Because it's very hard for them to, pinpoint the posts that actually they should be looking at. So we want to develop a feed there that could be, automatically fit for a specific language. There's more to it, so I think about it as content labeling, basically, right? So the language is the first thing. Another one, I want to do profanity label. I want to do detection of keywords, and simple things like that. Another thing that we were thinking and looking just at the needs of ours and other node operators is some sort of a whitelist mechanism. There is a whitelist mechanism in BitClout, but sadly it isn't really working that well. So perhaps there is, this part or fix for this coming from the external nodes operators, right? Because BitClout.com has it solved, and for us this seems to be an issue. But ultimately I think there's plenty of tools that need to be built, right? I'm in particular interested about safety and the reputation, so we're definitely gonna explore that. What other topics are gonna be requested by the nodes community that we started building? I don't know yet. I think the community doesn't know either, but I think the stronger we are, the better prepared we are to satisfy that demand.
Yeah, well, definitely on content curation front, I think there's a lot of demand and interest there, whether it be filters or other types of behind the scenes curation. I know for Twitter I use TweetDeck, and I'm able to filter keywords, build lists. Lists is something people have been asking for a lot, but I think sometimes lists are they're static, they're not as interesting. What you're mentioning, where you have a bot or more like labels that curate the content, I think that's very interesting. So really looking forward to the future of Love4Source, and I really appreciate the node discussion. Anything we didn't talk about, final words on nodes, Love4Source, anything else on your mind?
There is a big discussion coming up, I think, about the identity. Many people ask us why do we host identity. Long story short, I think it's better both for us and for the users, but it doesn't mean that every single node should have their own identity. We do definitely want to keep evolving identity and have additional mechanisms that are especially useful for application developers and people that will be integrating it, right? So one good example here is limiting by the amount of spend, for example, or having some sort of additional encryption layer on top of that. Again, we hope that all of those, if and when those improvements arrive, if we get there before the core team, we think that those things are not exactly on the focus list, but they can be always ported back. So that's one big thing, I think. Yeah, let's start hacking. I mean,
yeah, I think I agree with you on identity. We need more resiliency in the BitClout ecosystem. So having an alternative identity serves that well. And then, as you mentioned, these layers for other apps that maybe you want to do $1 to $2 transactions, but you don't want to. You're never going to shell out $100, $200 there. So that's something that you can control through there and give a different level of permission than's currently possible. So I really like your thinking. I think a lot of great things happening at Love4Source. Really appreciate you coming on.
Thank you very much for having me. Just wanted to say we're making a white hat development node. Please join us. Let's make it happen. Let's get this rocket to the moon.
Sounds great. Well, thank you so much, Kanshi. I really appreciate it. And I'm going to keep using Love4Source because I really like the node. I'm really looking forward to all the improvements because, I like that mindset of continuing to evolve and always improving, and looking forward to the new stuff.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy that to bring joy and to have people use it. This is my second social network, so I'm very, very excited what the future is going to bring.
Sounds great. Well, we'll definitely talk again soon and have an update for the listeners.
Thank you very much. Cheers.